Hello folks, Michael J here. How you guys doing? Hopefully everybody's doing well. I've got a good show lined up for you today. So what we're focusing on is to further develop an understanding of the deep state created by Donald Trump, the depths that he went to overturn an election that was not fake, was not fraud. He set you up back in the summer, long before the November election. This guy's got a history of doing it. He did it with the Republican nominee going back before the election of 2016. There's more than enough video footage to cover that. Ted Cruz and every other candidate at that time made a statement, whereas they inferred when he doesn't win, it's fraud. And so he set you up for it at the beginning. You fall for it. There was a lot of pressure on Mike Pence after November 3 and up till the electoral slate record-taking of January 6th. And just to give you a bit of an idea, you got to go with the proof, right? You got to go with the proof. Okay, so we're going to go to the main screen here right now. And let's give it to you. So here we have January 1993. So this is January 6, 1993. One thing you're going to notice, every one of these electoral certificate procedures, none of the outgoing presidents had a rally. None of the outgoing presidents held a rally on the date of January 6th. Only Donald J. Trump, and when he did, the Capitol building was overrun. The Electoral College count was paused until later that night. I think they reconvened about 11 p.m. You really got to question why you're allowing these things to go on, why you would think this guy's fit to be a president of the United States, based on what he's doing right now. So let's look. January 6, 1993.
Ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form. The tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count.
Okay, so this is Al Gore, January 6. This was actually January 6, 1997. January 6, 1997. And there's good old Newt Gingrich right there beside him.
And make a list of the votes cast by the electors. After ascertainment has been made that the certificates are authentic and correct in form,
2001, January 6th.
the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
I think the one prior might have been January 9th, but normally it's January 6th. Now here we have Dick Cheney. January 6, 2006 now.
Ascertaining that certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors.
After ascertainment has been had that the certificate...
Okay, January the 8th, 2009. No outgoing president having a rally, but here's Dick Cheney overseeing the certification of the Electoral College votes, as they do each and every election year.
Certificates are authentic and correct in form. The tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
After ascertainment has been had that certificates are...
Okay, January 4, 2013. Vice President Joe Biden, overseeing the certification of the Electoral College vote. Outgoing admin did not have a rally on that day.
authentic and correct in form. The tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors after the ascertainment has been had that the certificate.
Okay, January 6, 2017. Joe Biden again. Vice President overseeing the certification of the Electoral College vote. House Speaker Paul Ryan is to his right on screen there.
Certificates are authentic and correct in form. The tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
Notice a theme? It's a script, right? It's always the same every 4 years.
Yeah,
Whoever is acting as the president.
Same. Every vice president that certifies the Electoral College vote of the outgoing administration basically states word for word the same script. It's been happening for years. You've just seen it from 1997 up to 2017.
Of the Senate, whoever the vice president is, it comes time every 4 years for them to open up and count all the electoral votes. And it's always.
And one other thing, not one outgoing administration during each one of those different time periods that you had seen held a rally and revved up the crowd in that rally to overtake the Capitol building and stop the Electoral College vote. Didn't happen. None of those administrations. January 6, 2021 was the first time.
Always the same. I mean, with, one or two little word shifts here and there, it's always the same thing. After ascertaining that the certificates are authentic and correct, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the elector. They say the exact same thing every 4 years. The words shift like a hair or two in either direction, but it's always the same every 4 years. Until this last time. This last time, for the first time ever, started off just like it always does, but then it careened off in a whole new direction we've never heard before. Watch.
After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes.
January 6, 2021, Mike Pence, outgoing administration, Vice President, overseeing the certification of the Electoral College vote.
Cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama.
Here's where he diverges. This has never been, this part he's mentioning, where he mentions Alabama, has never been mentioned by any outgoing administration or vice president of that administration who oversees the certification of the Electoral College vote. Nobody has added to the original script until January 6, 2021 by Mike Pence here, and you're going to notice it now.
Which the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a.
He mentions the parliamentarians advise me this is the only slate to vote. There's a reason for this, folks. This is why Mike Pence had the parliamentarian add this to the script.
Return from the state that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors.
What was all that at the end? All that stuff that the parliamentarian has advised you, that was all new. As far as we can tell, nothing like that has ever been said at any one of these things. But Mike Pence, when he opened the electoral votes, January 6th last year, he added that whole new bit. The parliamentarian has advised me there's only one document that counts as a certificate of vote from a state, and that certificate, he says, has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state. That's all new language that we've never heard before in this context. Vice presidents always say the exact same thing when it comes time for them to announce the Electoral College votes. But when Mike Pence did it, he added this whole new complicated clause saying the parliamentarian had advised him that only one certificate of electors could be counted from any one state. It had to have the explicit blessing of an authority of that state. That was all new.
No.
And
why is that, you ask? Why is that, you ask? Why would anybody want to do something like that? Why would anybody want to do something like that? That's a good question, isn't it, folks? Good question, eh? Why would anybody possibly want to do that? Well, let's take a look here. Let's take a look here. Well, I'm just checking a recent video I did. And this will explain exactly why. Exactly why. Just bear with me. Takes a while. My own video, but YouTube takes a while to, and I wasn't prepared for this because I think for all intents and purposes, you need to actually see this. Okay. Okie doke. Now this is a video that I actually broadcast.
District Court after police blocked the group from entering the state capitol.
It's titled Trump's Sedition and Fall of Democracy, End of the Roman Empire.
The Capitol is closed unless you have an office here to conduct business today.
Okay.
Or
so this is Lansing, Michigan. And here's a state trooper. And this is why Mike Pence went out of his way. We're going to come back to this one. We're going to go back to Rachel Maddox. Good old Rachel. Oh, Rachel, where are you? Where art thou? Oh, there she is. Okay.
The tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
After ascertaining that certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors.
After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
After ascertainment has been had that certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors. After the ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors.
Notice a theme? It's a script, right?
Exactly.
It's always the same, every 4 years. whoever is acting as the president of the Senate, whoever the vice president is, it comes time every 4 years for them to open up and count all the electoral votes. And it's always the same. I mean, with, one or two little word shifts here and there, it's always the same
barely any
thing.
shift
After
whatsoever,
ascertaining
but
that
it's
the
basically
certificates
the
are
same.
authentic and correct, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the elector. They say the exact same thing every 4 years. The words shift like a hair or two in either direction, but it's always the same every 4 years. Until this last time. This last time, for the first time ever, it started off just like it always does, but then it careened off in a whole new direction we've never heard before. Watch.
After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which
You notice here, casting for each state, beginning with Alabama. Never happened in any other oversee of the Electoral College vote certification process before. Now let's hear what he says.
the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote.
Okay, so the parliamentarians advise him the only certificate of vote
From that state,
from
and
that
purports to be a
state
return from the state,
that
that
purports to
has
be a return
annexed
by that
to it a
state.
certificate from an authority of that state purporting.
Okay, so there's an annexation that is basically an affidavit that it's a true certificate of the count, and it's the only certificate of count. And now, yes, well, why do we say that? Why do we say that? Why do we say that? Good question, right? I'll tell you why. And this is where I thought at the last second I'd bring up my video from an earlier broadcast. And I'll pull it right back up here, folks. Where did it go? What the heck? I didn't close it, did I? I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have, folks. Oh my. Did that happen? Quite embarrassing if that happened. Oh my. Oh my goodness. Okay, just got to pull it. Oh, you know why? I know why. Silly moi. It came up in a different browser. That's why. The different browser, monsieur. Hey, shit. Pardon me. Stuff happens, folks. Okay. So here we go. So... This is in Michigan. Okay? The Republican Party and Republicans conveyed fraudulent documents trying to put different electoral candidate or slate of certificates. They filed with the archives also. It's all on the record. They're under investigation for state and federal violations of law now because of it. But here we had 5 states. You had Georgia, you had Nevada, you had Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. Republican Party people conveying false fraudulent documents, making false fraudulent statements that they were true. Now, here you go. This is Michigan. And what you have to understand, once the Electoral College votes have been done, authenticated, and before the certification process of January 6th, each state has to have a certification process too. And they know who the electors are for that, and they have a list of that. Now, here's the thing. They had 16 electors for the state of Michigan, and they were already present and accounted for. You've got Republican Party people that had already submitted fraudulent documents to the archives, with them now too as well, and submitted them to the other parties as well, trying to change the vote. So here you've got it. Here are the Republicans. They've got all their phony documents on hand. They're trying to storm and represent as the electoral representatives of the state. Meanwhile, the I believe it was 16 was already there and accounted for. You know, they do have a list. And when they do arrive, they do check them off. So, of course, they're not being allowed in there because it's unlawful. They already have the representation in there. But this is to the extent that Donald J. Trump at all would go to overturn an election.
College process. Anybody else is not permitted to come in. Yeah, the electors are already here. They've been checked in.
Not all the electors are inside.
Yeah, not the phony ones.
The electors that we've been advised by the governor's staff that we're going to be here to vote in the electoral college have been checked in. They're already here.
But the GOP electors, I'm sorry.
I understand. The Capitol is closed.
But the fraudulent ones want in.
Let's bring.
That's it. The fraudulent ones want to be in there. You know, talk about the election being stolen and fraud. The only one committing election deceit and fraud is the Republican Party. The deep state created by Donald J. Trump. That's all it was. Nobody else, folks. Nobody else. And you just don't get it. It's rather unfortunate, but you just don't get it. There's a perfect example of what happened and why Mike Pence
to appoint or ascertain
changed the script.
electors.
He knew it was going to happen.
What was all that at the end?
Okay. Why Mike Pence did that? Because he did not want to do anything unlawful. You heard me right. He did not, Mike Pence did not want to do anything unlawful, as per the Constitution of the American Republic.
All that stuff that the parliamentarian has advised you, that was all new. As far as we can tell, nothing like that has ever been said at any one of these things.
Yeah.
But Mike Pence, when he opened the electoral votes, January 6th last year, he added that whole new bit. The parliamentarian has advised me there's only one document that counts as a certificate of vote from a state. And
okay, so what that tells us, folks, is this. Mike Pence knew this well ahead of advance that Trump et al., including over 100 senators, Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, and a cast of more, as you should know or know. So we do have evidence, enough evidence to show the intent was there to overthrow a democratically elected government.
that certificate, he says, has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state. That's all new language that we've never heard before in this context.
That's correct.
Vice presidents always say the exact same thing when it comes time for them to announce the Electoral College votes.
Except for January 6, 2021.
Whole...
And January 6, 2021, the outgoing president, Donald J. Trump, as a last effort to subvert the election, held a rally and created a maelstrom that raided the Capitol building, overran it, breached the walls, overran it, and stopped the Electoral College slate of votes being counted as they always have, and they had to reconvene later at 11 o'clock when they got control of the Capitol again.
Whole new complicated clause saying the parliamentarian had advised him that only one certificate of electors could be counted from any one state. It had to have the explicit blessing of an authority of that state. That was all new. And there's been some minor drama around the Electoral College before in previous elections. But no vice president ever before felt the need to get a parliamentarian's ruling, basically giving him a clear legal way to assert that he doesn't have to count any forged fake set of electors that might have been sent into him alongside the real ones. No vice president has ever before had to get some sort of language from the parliamentarian explaining that if two sets of electors were sent in from a particular state, he was only going to have to count the one. But Mike Pence had to do that, which means Vice President Mike Pence knew in advance of January 6th that Republicans in multiple states had sent in forged fake electoral votes, documents purporting to be the real electoral votes from those states, even though they were not real. We know he knew about it because we can see he had to maneuver in advance of actually conducting the vote count that day to get the parliamentarian to give him that language so he could justify not counting the fake votes.
And not just that. Trump this past weekend at a rally in Arizona telling everybody how he's going to get new state legislators, new state governors, and new attorney generals so that this won't happen again. So it's just setting up for the midterms and the 2024 presidential election. He's setting the vote up to be rigged. He's telling you about it right now. You know about it right now, and you are acquiescing to it by going along with this. The people of the United States of America, are you good, lawful people? Never before in the history of the Republic have you had anything as bad as this ever happen. One of note was what they called Watergate. A guy by the name of Nixon. But at that time, the Republicans in Congress and the Senate, they understood their role, and that was to reinforce the law. And Barry Goldwater told Nixon, we are not going to be complicit to criminal activities. We are here to serve the people of the United States of America. And that's why Nixon resigned. Nobody in the Republican Party has even come close to the actions of a Barry Goldwater. Let's go back to the video here.
Reporter Kyle Cheney at Politico.com gets credit for catching this. And catching it at an auspicious time. It was two...
Yeah, read this. These are the minutes of the word of each script. And you can see for yourself the difference in the wording. 2005, 2009, 2013, 2017, and then all of a sudden 2021, there's a big difference. Why is there a big difference? Vice President Mike Pence knew his party, the Republican Party, was committing fraud, committing unlawful acts to deceive the American people.
2:55 in the morning on the night of January 6th last year, 2:55 a.m. January 7th, this is the night after the Capitol had been attacked. Kyle Cheney that night made note of how Pence's language seemed to be different than all previous vice presidents had used for every previous electoral vote count. Mr. Cheney was totally right. It's totally obvious once you lay down what Pence said. All that extra verbiage that Pence added alongside the very austere, almost exactly unchanging language from all the other times the vice president has done the vote count in modern times. Reporter Kyle Cheney figured that out based on the changed language that Pence used. Figured out that Vice President Pence's office must have worked with the Senate parliamentarian ahead of time to head off this stunt, to head off this part of the plot, to head off what Republicans were trying to do, sending in these forged electoral college votes, which they did, in fact, not just fill out and keep. They filled them out, signed them, and sent them into the National Archives and to the United States Senate as if they were real.
Yipperdoodle, folks. That's what happened there. And you're letting this kind of stuff happen. Letting this kind of stuff happen. So now you're seeing how the only one, or the only ones, committing election fraud are the Republican Party of the 2020 election. They're the party committing the fraud. You've seen it right here for yourselves. Now, what's more disturbing is what I've told you before. And, you know, you've had the Republicans and Donald Trump whip up the people of the United States of America in order to overrun the Capitol building, stop a government electoral college vote. And I got to tell you, one of the senators involved with that, Marjorie Taylor Greene. And guess what? She's at it again. This girl is at it again. And you'll see right here.
Americans and gives us the ability.
So she is saying here right now, the Democrats, got to understand the Democrats and the Republicans are political parties that are protected under the Constitution. And now she's saying the Democrats, she's inciting hate. She's creating a belief system with no moral right to do it, let alone act upon it by stating it verbally to the public. But she says the Democrats hate our Second Amendment because ultimately the truth is it's our Second Amendment rights. Yeah, you do have Second Amendment rights, a right to bear arms and to protect Americans. And as the founders originally intended, in the event the British tried to overrun the government and take over the country again. Not to take out a political opponent that is protected under the Constitution. Do you not understand the problem with this? And then she's calling her opposition a tyrannical government, which is adding more fuel to the fire. and creating a civil war. You've never had this since the time of Abraham Lincoln. Never. Until you've had Donald J. Trump, who has been so divisive or divisive to actually put the country in a state of possible civil war. You've seen Americans fight Americans in the Capitol building, the breach of the Capitol building and the overrun of it, and its due process, which is a serious crime. Americans doing that to Americans. What do you think how the Capitol Police felt? And the Washington, D.C. police to back them up. How do you think they felt? Americans fighting for them? A country of freedom and liberty? We really got to question this, folks.
To defend ourselves from a tyrannical
You're going to let your grandchildren
government. And I hate to use this language,
and your
but
children,
Democrats,
by doing nothing and allowing this stuff to go on, your grandchildren, your children and grandchildren are going to have to live with the effects of this in the future. The Republican Party is not the party of law and order. Every talking point, whether it's the overrun of immigration, whether it's inflation, they're all created to divide your country. Every one of these points. It's all been created. They create the crisis. They provide the fix. They say the act was unprecedented, so we can convey fraudulent documents because unprecedented times require unprecedented actions, and seeing how there's no case law and there's no precedence, we can do it, and then they just take over and go in denial, denial, denial. Russians do it. Trump cozying up to Putin. What's Putin doing now? He's on the border of Ukraine. 7 years ago, he invaded Crimea, took it over, or Crimea. Now he's looking to do it with Ukraine. And here's where it's dangerous. She's saying, but Democrats, they're doing exactly what our founders talked about. No, they're not. She's created a moral belief. She's acting upon this moral belief. And it's unlawful. When you exert your will in a manner that denies other people's their free will to life and liberty, just because you have a moral belief does not give you the right to act upon it. And don't ever forget that. So you want a possible civil war? And then here's another thing. Louis DeJoy, Postmaster General. You know, funny thing, you donate $1 million plus to Trump's campaign, you get these plum jobs. Well, anyways, you got a global health pandemic. It's a serious situation. And Trump puts Louis DeJoy in a position of overseeing postal operations across the country. What's he start doing? You got a global health pandemic. Got to use the post office now more than ever because you got a virus that's killing people. Been doing mail-in voting for many, many years. And you might say, well, mail-in voting, fraud. You were set up for that too. Didn't happen. You had multiple audits of each state. There was no fraud of substance whatsoever, other than what normally has been the case for decades at the most. So Louis DeJoy brought into a congressional meeting to ask questions. Why you remove the mail sorting machines and mailboxes? Well, somebody before me gave that direction. Well, why is it being done? I don't know. And then one of the congressional persons, well, are you going to put them back? He said, no. Well, if he doesn't know who did it, he doesn't know the reason why it was done. There's a global pandemic, so the need for the Postal Service is more than ever. So why is he adamantly saying no? What the congressional people forgot to do was follow up with an appropriate question. Why are you not putting them back, Mr. DeJordy? And another thing, and I've mentioned this before in Texas, you had one drop box for 1,300 square miles. You read me right. One drop box for 1,300 square miles. How long is it going to take if you got to take public transit to drop off your mail-in ballot? That was your right to vote. So now, you've seen Trump, the head of the Republican Party, and you've seen other people in the Republican Party fall in line. The leader that every act that he does, everything he does, all roads lead to Putin. Don't you ever forget that. So we're going to go back to the main screen now. Voting rights are important. You've got states putting new attorney generals, governors, state electors, or legislators in a position of power to undermine the vote and the will of the people, which is totally wrong. This is 2022, folks. It's not 1722. It's not 1814. This is 2022.
Right thing.
On this Martin Luther King holiday, his family worries about the future, even while looking back at the man who was murdered fighting for equality over half a century ago. The Kings led a march across the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge here in Washington today, demanding the Senate pass voting rights legislation. And this comes on the eve of when the Senate will begin debate on this issue. Now, over the holiday weekend, the Kings brought their message to Arizona. So did Donald Trump and the return of the big lie. Ardoni O'Sullivan saw firsthand how their visions of free and fair elections could not be further apart.
No celebration without legislation.
We all have a voice in this country in which we live. And voting is that opportunity that we have.
This Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend in Arizona, a battle for the future of American democracy.
We wanted to come on this day because there's also a senator, Senator Sinema, who seems to be blocking democracy instead of being on the side of advancing democracy.
Senator Sinema?
The King family here calling on Arizona Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema to stand up for voters' rights.
She says she wants voting rights, but how do you want voting rights without creating a path for that to happen? That is inconsistent, and that is unacceptable.
Sinema and fellow Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia are blocking the passage of a pair of voting rights bills aimed at countering some of the restrictive voting measures enacted by Republicans at the state level. Sinema says she is supportive of the bills, but not in favor of changing Senate rules to get them passed.
And while I continue to support these bills, I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country.
That stance music to the ears of some Trump supporters this weekend, on hand at a rally for Trump in Sinema's home state.
God bless Kirsten Sinema and what she's doing, you know?
Kristen Sinema. Good for her. You know, she's our representative. She represents the state. She's not along party lines. She's what's good for the country.
Do you like Kirsten Sinema?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And Manchin. In fact, I have sent emails to them encouraging them to stand up and do what's right for the people of Arizona.
Those supporters in line for Trump's rally Saturday also in attendance a hodgepodge of election deniers like MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, Congressman Paul Gosar, and even Ali Alexander, one of the main organizers.
Mike the Pillow Man, he's still at it. He's still at it. How many cases went to court? They were thrown out of court because there was no evidence of any merit of any electoral fraud. Bottom line. But they're still parroting the election was stolen. Republicans down ballot did very well during the 2020 election. So if that's the case, maybe all those Republican people that got elected should be thrown out also, shouldn't it? You don't get it, folks. You're just acting upon the noise, not upon the real facts about what really happened. Why you even listen to this stuff? And now you're seeing governors, state legislators, and attorney generals in states being changed to get people that are loyal strictly to Donald Trump and not the United States of America and the people of America, the will of the majority of the people. And there's something wrong with that, especially now you know it and you know what's happening. And to be party of that is criminal. Anybody that is party of that is criminal. It's tragic.
Of Stop the Steal, who went into hiding after the insurrection and was recently called in front of the January 6th House Select Committee.
Hey, Ali, are you worried that you might get indicted?
Oh, crap. Sorry. I forgot to switch.
Trump here giving his support to two election deniers.
I forgot
who are
to
running
switch
to
the screen
control
before I
elections
did.
in
Sorry,
the
we're
state.
good.
Carrie Lake is running for governor.
There's a few other people I'd like to send right down to the prison down here in Florence. Anybody who was involved in that corrupt, shady, shoddy election.
Okay, this is what I was trying to tell you. This is Trump in Arizona. Back it up a bit here. There we go.
Indicted.
Thank you, Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you, Arizona. Okay, so this is the very same weekend, this past weekend, Martin Luther King March in Arizona for voting rights. Trump's holding a rally right here in Arizona, and this is after Republicans were found to have conveyed fraudulent documents, made fraudulent representations to overturn the electoral slate of votes. And now he's telling you he's going to change the state electors, state governors, state attorney generals to make sure this doesn't happen again so that he can get away with it. And I got to ask, knowing this, why are you letting this happen? Why are you allowing this to happen?
To two election deniers who are running to control elections in the state. Carrie Lake is running for governor.
There's a few other people I'd like to send right down to the prison down here in Florence. Anybody who was involved in that corrupt, shady...
It was Republican Party members that are the corrupt ones. And she's going to continue the lie and allow the, she becomes governor, to falsify their statements. And she'll do like the guy just did in Arizona. Well, it's unprecedented times. Requires unprecedented action. No case law, no precedents. So, as I said before, they create the crisis. Crisis doesn't exist, but they create the crisis. Election fraud, law and order, all this stuff going on. Well, they're the guys committing it. They're talking about it because they're committing it. They're deflecting from their own actions, and you don't get it. And now they're going to stack the cards in their favor, just like going to the casino. And, the odds are against you. But anyways, this particular casino you're going to is rigged to the point that the house never loses. And this is what they're doing. And you're allowing it to happen. By doing nothing and acquiescing it, it's just your party to it as well.
Shoddy election of 2020. Lock them up.
And Mark Fincham, who previously said he was an oath keeper and is now running for Secretary of State.
Donald Trump won.
Fincham has echoed QAnon-type conspiracy
Yeah,
theories about
Oath Keeper guy,
officials.
head of the Oath Keepers, just got charged with sedition conspiracy.
Distribution of children, and unfortunately, there's a whole lot of elected officials that are involved in that.
And he continues to falsely attack the legitimacy of the 2020 election here in Arizona.
I look forward to the day that we set aside an irredeemably flawed election. That's the election of 2020. With all the evidence we have,
create the
Arizona
crisis.
Election should be decertified by the legislature.
Here's the question: they're resorting to the legislature now. It's already gone to the courts many times over. Courts threw it out because no merit, no evidence. No evidence, people. Do you not understand? These are con men. They're in their business of greed and power for their own gain. Nothing to do with the gain of the American people. You've been friggin' gaslit.
That's part of a national trend. A Washington Post tally finding 163 Republicans who have embraced Trump's false claims.
So as I told you, the deep state was created by Trump. He claims there's a deep state. Yeah, he's created the deep state. It's his deep state. Unbelievable. So now they're gone to the state level. Bad enough that you had over 100 senators sign on to overturn the Electoral College vote of January 6th. The Republican Party committing sedition, and you're allowing them to do it. Anybody in the general public does it, you end up going to jail. You go to jail for a long friggin' time. These guys get away with it, and you let them get away with it. You should be voting them out. Trump's a friend with Putin. We've got to be good ties with Russia. They're good. Here they are looking to invade Ukraine. Like, come on.
Are running for statewide positions that would give them authority over the administration of elections. Arizona's current Secretary of State, Katie.
That means they can overturn the will of the people at their own discretion and justify it without cause. They'll say they have cause, but they can do it without cause. And you just don't get it.
Hobbs now running for governor.
I think we are really at a defining moment. I mean, in 2020, democracy prevailed, and 2020 and after 2020, democracy prevailed because people on both sides of the aisle did their jobs. And what we're seeing now is this just multi-pronged attack, and one of those prongs is Trump trying to instill his loyalists into key positions that have some level of determination over how elections are certified and conducted, and that's pretty scary.
We will pass this bill. And on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend, his 13-year-old granddaughter following in her grandfather's footsteps with a warning for today.
I think it's so important to vote, and it's so important to have the right to vote, because right now our country is at stake.
And Doni is joining us now. Doni, as always, great report taking us right into the middle of things there. You know, just this month, the Maricopa County recorder, who is a Republican, who defeated a Democrat in 2020, debunked 76 out of 77 claims by the so-called cyber ninjas. That is the group, of course, that carried out that so-called fraud and is now shutting down. And he said, quote, "The truth is the Maricopa County 2020 election was not stolen."
Okay. But once you change the state legislators, the governors and the attorney generals that are loyal to Donald Trump, you're not going to get the representation of the truth like you have from this Stephen Richer. You are not going to have the truth. You're going to the fraud is the Republican Party under Donald J. Trump.
From Donald Trump. I wonder if any of that penetrates into the consciousness of Trump supporters that you spoke with.
Yeah, I mean, that Republican election official is an example of somebody that many Trump supporters and Trump himself, of course, wants to get rid of. I did think what was quite notable about this trip to Arizona, you know, for so much of the past year, we have heard outlandish and really, really crazy conspiracy theories about voting, whether it was, you know, Hugo Chavez, voting machines swaying the election for Donald Trump, and pieces of paper from China some way changing votes. A lot of that stuff seemed to die down, at least based on the people we had spoken to, and they were back talking about more generally the election being stolen, and talking more along the lines of the restrictive voting measures that are being brought in by Republicans at a state level. So the conspiracy theories seem to have, the more fringe conspiracy theories, I guess, have eased a bit, and now the talking points have really begun to align with these restrictive measures from Republicans. But of course, it is all still very much based on a big lie.
Because as you see these restrictive measures that are being put in place by Republicans, Trump supporters actually feel, and they're buying into this line, that they are being disenfranchised, Doni.
Yeah, and you know, it was kind of striking. We started off Saturday morning at that march with the King family and speaking to an elderly African American woman, a voter in Arizona.
Walk back in
you know,
time.
for her, the fear is real. What she is seeing, it is based in history. It's echoes of Jim Crow. What they are seeing with these restrictions that are being brought in now. On the other side of things, there are people at the Trump rally who are fearful. I think some of them know better. Some of them know that this is a lie and it's BS and it's a talking point. But a lot of them really have been bought so far into this world of conspiracy that they genuinely do believe that American democracy is a joke. And it's a very, very sad place for an American to be in that mindset, particularly because of lies. So there is fear on both sides of this debate, but obviously with much different motivations. Brianna?
Yeah, Doni O'Sullivan, thank you so much for that.
Okay, folks. There you go. So, yeah. So you got Marjorie Taylor Greene inciting violence again, telling people their Second Amendment rights to be armed, take out the Democrats. Republican voting restrictions. So let's look at the Republican voting restrictions now.
At the rally former President Trump held in Arizona this weekend, one of the Republicans who signed the forged elector document from Arizona, he spoke as one of the warm-up acts for Trump. Because why not? This is what a rally is like now for the presumed Republican presidential nominee in the next election.
Who won the election? You're right, Trump won! Trump won! We are going to fix...
Well, they convey fraudulent documents, and I guess they figure if they get Trump back in as president, they can get pardons again. Who would have thunk, eh?
2020. I hope that we're going to decertify 2020. How about you?
And no more are they going to be able to get away with this kind of deception, this kind of fraud and illegal activity. Not only people in general, but the election workers. We want indictments of the election workers so that they don't continue to do this.
No, blame it on the election workers. Make the crisis, no crisis into a crisis. And multiple courts ruled you have no evidence whatsoever, but you're still parroting the lie just to keep this Donald J. Trump, this narcissistic SOB, happy. Like, give me a break. That's like Edward G. Robinson in the Ten Commandments. He creates a gold statue so that they can friggin' have something to idolize. What is wrong with that picture? Trump being that gold statue? Do you see something wrong with that picture? He definitely is not the chosen one, folks. The exact opposite of that. And you just don't get it. You just don't get it.
I've had several media outlets call me, Washington Post, CNN, and they want to know why I was a Trump elector. Donald Trump won this election. And I call upon the Arizona legislature to vote to decertify the 2020 election.
Well, you tried conveying fraudulent documents without cause. Fraudulent documents. You got caught doing that, so if you remove the legislators, put legislators loyal to Donald Trump, you can get away with it. We've seen this.
Putting the people who signed the forged elector paperwork up on stage so everybody can cheer for them, to get them warmed up for cheering for the former president. I mean, this kind of stuff does seem crazy. Like, this seems like the whole vibe on the Trump rally thing is like kind of low rent and out there, right? But this is what it's like in the Republican Party right now. This is how they are gearing up for the next election. You know, indict the election workers. But it is working for them as planned, even in the high rent districts. I mean, the new Texas voting restrictions were like in many states, they were passed on the pretext that all that election fraud that made the last election stolen, that justified lots of new laws in Texas to make it harder to vote in that state. That's paying off already. You saw the headline this weekend. Election officials in Texas reject hundreds of ballot applications under the state's new voting restrictions. Quote, election officials in one of the most populous counties in Texas have rejected about half of the applications for ballots because of the state's new voting restrictions enacted by Republicans last year. Texas Republicans last year passed their bill establishing new limits on voting over the objections of Democrats, part of a wave of efforts led by Republican-led states, a wave of efforts by Republican-led states to impose new restrictions.
Create the crisis, replace the legislators, rewrite legislation so that you can get away with murder. Simple as that.
Many in the Republican Party echoed former President Donald Trump's baseless claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election in arguing for the new restrictions. The county clerk's office in Travis County, the fifth most populous county and home to Texas's capital of Austin, cited the new law's recent changes to ID requirements in rejecting about half of the 700 applications for mail-in ballots. They're throwing out half the ballot applications because the new restrictive voting law says they have to be. And you had to pass that voting restriction law because of all the fraud. Decertify, decertify. It's working perfectly for them. I mean, it looks crazy to the rest of the country, but it is working perfectly for them. And what's to stop them?
Yeah, that's the question. What's going to stop them? You're doing nothing about it? Vote them out. Get Republicans that are honest for a change. That would be a nice thing. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Okay. So here's the problem. You're closer. You've got this Donald J. Trump, so divisive, creating such a division in the country, lying, cheating. You don't do anything about it. Is civil war a possibility now? Let's check it out.
What do Syria, Sri Lanka, Yemen, Iraq, Ukraine, and the former Yugoslavia have in common? They're all places that have recently suffered through some of the worst civil wars in modern history. Violent upheavals that have ultimately killed or displaced millions of people, while most Americans have watched from afar. But a political scientist who has studied those civil wars and been to many of those countries says that the United States is now on a path to joining them. Sounds crazy, right? On this show, we talk a lot about coups and insurrections and domestic extremism. But at what point do we even consider speaking seriously about the next level? Because worse than all of those things is open, bloody, violent civil war. And it sounds crazy for me to even say that it's possible. But I'm not Dr. Barbara F. Walter. No, not Barbara Walters, the journalist. Barbara F. Walter, a professor at the University of California, San Diego, who has studied civil wars and their causes since 1990, conducting field research across the globe from Israel to Northern Ireland to Myanmar to Colombia to Zimbabwe. And Walter has even teamed with other academics on the CIA-funded Political Instability Task Force to help the government predict future global sites of unrest. But in 2018, after a year of Donald Trump in the White House, she began to focus on instability here at home. The result was a new book coming out next week titled How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. In it, she warns that the worst case scenario could in fact happen here in America. Quote, if you were an analyst in a foreign country looking at events in America, the same way you'd look at events in Ukraine or the Ivory Coast or Venezuela, you would go down a checklist, assessing each of the conditions that make civil war likely. And what you would find is that the United States, a democracy founded more than 2 centuries ago, has entered very dangerous territory. She cites Slobodan Milosevic, the bloodthirsty Serbian president who vilified other Yugoslavian ethnic groups and spurred the Balkans War of the 1990s as evidence that the groundwork for civil wars is often laid by what political scientists call ethnic entrepreneurs, who make the fight about their group's position, their group's status in society. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's not just about economic anxiety. Surprise. Plenty of countries have extreme polarization and factions. Walter says that the ones that erupt into civil war have something else in common. They're not entirely democratic and not entirely authoritarian either. Have a look at Iraq, what happened there after the US invaded and brought in a kind of democratic system. Walter says, quote, it wasn't the poorest countries that were at the highest risk of conflict or the most unequal or the most ethnically or religiously heterogeneous, even the most repressive. It was living in a partial democracy that made citizens more likely to pick up a gun and begin to fight. No sweat, right? We're a democracy. We're fine. Not so fast. For years, political scientists have used a special scale from -10 to 10 to +10 to measure how democratic a country is. The US has historically been a +10, at least since the last Civil War or thereabouts. But under Trump, that number declined steadily. And in the aftermath of the 2020 election, the US dropped to a +5 rating, the lowest since the first Civil War. By that measure, we're no longer a full democracy, but what political scientists call an anocracy. And that Walters says that is the Civil War danger zone. Combine that with our extreme factionalization, rising attacks by right-wing extremists, and the easy availability of guns, of conspiracy theories, of misinformation on social media, and you have a tinderbox that most Americans don't or won't recognize, including most American politicians. I mean, how are we supposed to react to comments being made at right-wing conferences like this one?
At this point, we're living under corporate and medical fascism. This is tyranny. When do we get to use the guns? No, and I'm not, that's not a joke. I'm not saying it like that. I mean, literally, where's the line? How many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
No, I'm being serious, he assured the crowd, which should be a warning to the rest of us. If America has a second civil war, Walter concludes, the combatants will not gather in fields, nor will they wear uniforms. They will go online to plan their resistance, strategizing how to undermine the government at every level and gain control of parts of America. They will create chaos and fear, and then they will force Americans to pick sides. I mean, that is both chilling, but it also sounds kind of like where we are today. So how likely is civil war here in the coming months or years? I know it feels almost absurd to even ask the question, but how would we deal with it if we were to have another civil conflict in this country? And perhaps most important of all, what can be done now to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again in America? Who better to ask than the author herself? Joining me now is Barbara F. Walter, Professor of International Relations at UCSD and author of How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. Thank you so much for joining me on the show this evening. You make it clear in your new book that we're not talking about Gettysburg or the siege of Petersburg. We're not talking about that kind of conflict. We're talking about a scenario you put forward, which is very different. Talk us through that scenario and how we get there in your mind.
Yeah, one of the reasons why most Americans can't even conceive of a second civil war here is because they're thinking of the first one. They're thinking about two large armies meeting each other on a giant battlefield, men in uniforms dragging cannons. And the reality is that's the old 19th century version of a civil war. 21st century civil wars don't tend to look that way. And they don't tend to look that way in part because governments, militaries, including the United States, of course, have become much, much more powerful. One of the things that most Americans don't know was that the U.S. Army back in 1860 was really small and weak. There were only 16,000 soldiers. Think about that, 16,000 soldiers. And most of them were stationed west of the Mississippi to control Indian uprisings. So if you were the Confederacy and you were thinking about challenging the U.S. government, it was not crazy to think that you could actually win that war. It is crazy to think you could win a war against the U.S. military today. It has over 2 million people under arms. And so what's happened in the interim is that insurgents have shifted to a different strategy, the strategy of the weak. And so 21st century civil wars tend to be more like insurgencies. They tend to be decentralized, fought by lots of small groups, militias, paramilitary groups, sometimes working together, sometimes not working together. And they're using unconventional tactics.
And we've seen that.
Here, assassination
We've
there.
seen that abroad. We've seen that abroad. We've seen that in places like Iraq. What's shocking is that you're saying this could be coming to a city or town near you. I mean, we've already had domestic terrorist attacks. We've had the insurrection that we'll be commemorating tomorrow. But you're talking about something more widespread in the coming months and years. And I just want to clarify this. This is in your view, a Republican Party, a right-wing caused problem, is it not? Because in the book, you do say there are signs that people on the left are also getting armed, are more willing to see political violence than they were before. And we always hear about Antifa from the right. But in your view, what we're talking about in terms of a civil conflict, this is far-right militias, far-right activists.
Yeah, so I've studied every civil war that's happened since 1946, and I've collected and analyzed an enormous amount of data. And we actually have a good idea who tends to start civil wars. And again, this is surprising to most people. It's not the poorest people, as I said. It's not immigrants. It's not groups who are particularly heavily discriminated against. It's not the really weak people in society. The people who tend to start civil wars are groups that had once been politically dominant, but have either lost power or are threatened with losing power. So when you think about this country, we know that there is a group that has dominated politically, socially, economically for the entire time of this country, right? It's white Christian Americans. And we know that demographically they have been losing power for decades. And we know historically that these types of groups tend not to go down without a fight.
Sadly, your book has led to some lively debate among political scientists, including on Twitter. Dartmouth professor Brendan Nyhan and a few others have argued that the very term civil war is overly broad, not particularly enlightening, and could make it easier to dismiss the very real threats that you're highlighting. What's your response to that?
Well, civil wars is a term that is quite broad, and underneath civil wars comes lots of things from minor coups to full social revolutions. And I think on some, I think that comment in some ways is quite good. We should be very careful about talking about civil war because people tend to believe it's going to look like the last one. And the reality is we have to be very careful.
The reality is, no, it's done differently. You're already seeing it happen now in the gaslighting the United States of America by the Republican Party, conveying documents in 5 different states that were fraudulently conveyed, making false statements, authentic documents, whereas they're not. They're fraud, just to subvert the vote that was already in place, to overturn what already happened. It's a sad state of affairs, but it can snowball real fast and get out of control, and you don't realize it. So you better be worried. You better do something to stop this and stop the lies about the stolen election. It wasn't stolen.
Careful to inform them, no, it's going to look quite different. And that's especially important because then they can identify when it's happening, rather than say, oh, we're fine. We don't see a big Confederate-like army forming, and therefore everything's going to be okay. No, it's going to look something more like the Timothy McVeighs of the world, who are blowing up federal buildings. It's going to look more like the storming of the Capitol. This is what civil war today is going to look like.
And in your book, you also point out that some countries have been close to civil war, like the US, you argue is now, but have come back from the brink. You cite the example of apartheid-era South Africa, or the transition away from apartheid-era South Africa. What are the lessons there for the US? How do we stop this from happening?
Yeah. So back in 2011, the World Bank commissioned a report from me about how do people escape what we call the conflict trap. Countries that experience one civil war, like the United States, tend to be significantly more likely to experience a second or a third civil war. And they wanted to find out, what did countries do to escape this? And when you look at all countries over many, many decades, what you find out is that the ones that escape the conflict trap all do the same thing. They institute significant political reforms and they strengthen their democracy. They double down on democracy. And the ones that don't do that are the ones that experience repeated violence. And so when you look at South Africa, if you had asked Civil War experts in the 19...
Okay. Did you hear that, folks? This is within your control. It's within the control of the people. So if you do nothing, you've got no reason to complain when a civil war or separation of the country happens. So you're seeing voting rights suppressed. You're seeing legislators and state electors and attorney generals and governors changed in order to overturn fair elections that may not be in their favor, in favor of an autocrat. So this is your choice. You've got the free will, folks. Love and peace, or division, fear, and conflict. So you gotta, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to live your life in love and fear, or fear? Love or fear? Peace or conflict? So you got a choice here. Love and peace, or division, fear, and conflict. Love, peace, and harmony. Division, fear, and conflict. How do you want your children to grow up? How do you want your grandchildren to grow up? What legacy do you want to leave for people? What legacy do you want to leave for people? That's the question. So, suppress the vote, continue with more division, fear-mongering, and conflict, and go the route of a possible civil war? Or do you want to double down on democracy, open up the vote, true democracy, instead of subverting and oppressing and suppressing the vote? Double down on democracy for love and peace. Like, it's your choice. You got the free will to make that choice. You can either vote for ascension or descension. It's up to you. You have the free will, America, to make a choice. Ascension, love, peace, and harmony. Descension, division, fear-mongering, and conflict. Your choice. So, thanks for watching, folks. I hope this was an eye-opener for you. And it hasn't been so much for me. I've just seen the trend for a long time. Signs were on the wall as soon as 2016. But I said, let's give the guy a chance. You never know. Well, look where it's taken you. So anyways, take care, folks. Love and peace to all human beings on this planet. Take care. Stay safe. Remember, your health is priceless. Ciao for now, folks.